Bienvenidos and welcome to the webinar series entitled Post-Coronavirus Mineral Supply Chains, Business as Usual or the Big Reset. Prior to starting, I want to point out that we have English and Spanish simultaneous translation. You should have received the information of how to access the translation on your calendar invite, but just in case, I will show you again here on the screen the steps you need to take. You can access the app through which the translation occurs either by downloading it or accessing it directly via your browser using the URL shown under step 1. Then you have to put in the Mince's password, and then you press play and you can hear it in both languages. Today, most of the discussion will be in English, so those that prefer Spanish, please follow the steps that are shown on the screen. With that important detail out the way, let me thank you, the panelists and participants, for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules during a period with numerous competing online events. Let me assure you, though, that we have lined up an excellent discussion with knowledgeable experts on the topic to make sure that the next hour and a half is worth your time. I would like to thank our co-organizers of the webinar series, which include the Geosciences and Natural Resources Federal Institute, BGR, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the Center of Copper and Mining Studies, CESCO, and the German Chambers of Commerce of Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. I think the numerous co-organizers of this event goes to show that the topic of supply chain transparency is of great interest. Also, the reason why the original conceived one seminar has now resulted in a whole series where we can go into more depth on each topic. I will do my best to moderate today's session. My name is Nicolas Mendling, and I lead the Mince's program for GIZ, which is a German cooperation program that seeks to promote responsible mining practices in the Andean region. Today, we will kick off the series by taking an international perspective on the evolution of mineral supply chains. Prior to that, though, I would like to give the word to Janet Sanchez, the Director of the Natural Resources Division of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, to give us her welcoming remarks. Janet, por favor. La palabra es tuya. Janet, parece que estás en mute.
Otra vez. Ya.
Ahora, perfecto.
Esta máquina tiene vida propia. Bueno, muy buenos días. Gracias, Nicolás. Muy honrada de estar presente en esta serie de seminarios muy trascendentes, al menos para la región latinoamericana. Los temas mineros para varios de sus países son fundamentales para los países andinos, incluyendo también a Argentina, Chile, en fin. Son posibles apoyadores de las finanzas públicas también, ¿no es cierto?, y activadores de empleo, por tanto, tienen una relevancia macroeconómica y social de mucha trascendencia. Señor Søren Denk, jefe de la División de Energía, Infraestructura y Materias Primas del Ministerio Federal de Cooperación Económica y Desarrollo de Alemania, distinguidos panelistas que nos acompañan, Ben Jones, Jan Kosmol, Hugo Brody, Jaime Gornstein y Nicolás Manley. Un gusto compartir con ustedes este primer seminario. También agradecer a los organizadores del evento, bueno, como siempre, la cooperación alemana, tanto la GIZ como el BGR, CESCO, el Centro de Estudios de Cobre y la Minería, las cámaras de comercio chileno-alemana, peruano-alemana, colombiana-alemana y ecuatoriano-alemana. Un saludo cordial también a todos los representantes de gobierno de las instituciones pertinentes en relación a los temas mineros y también a las empresas y representantes de la sociedad civil que nos acompañan. Este es un momento particular, no es un momento cualquiera en el que ocurren estos debates, ¿no es cierto? Estamos en medio de una pandemia que, según lo han dicho los expertos y lo ha planteado la misma CEPAL, es la peor crisis en un siglo. Para la región es su peor momento, nunca ha caído desde que hay reportes estadísticos la economía tan velozmente como ahora, y esto ha tenido un impacto, ¿no es cierto?, tanto en la oferta como en la demanda de los minerales. Si bien algo han repuntado los precios de los minerales por las acciones deliberadas contracíclicas que han ido tomando los distintos gobiernos, de todas maneras estos precios no se han puesto a los niveles del boom. Por tanto, todavía tenemos mucha incertidumbre de lo que va a ocurrir. Como hemos dicho, las cadenas globales también han entrado en cuestión, no solamente desde el lado bajo de la cadena, sino desde el lado final de la cadena. Los países presentan y sus gobiernos también incertidumbre en términos de las medidas que van a tomar. Actores tan importantes como Estados Unidos, por ejemplo, presentan una incertidumbre de políticas desde el lado de los distintos candidatos, tienen orientaciones muy diferentes. Según quien gane serán más protectivos y en estrategias de relocalización de las cadenas más activas. La región también tiene preocupación, ¿no es cierto?, respecto a incorporar mayor tecnología, conocimiento y provocar mayor recorrido dentro de las cadenas en la propia región. Entonces hay muchos temas a discutir. La tecnología en el medio que ya viene desarrollándose en distintas dimensiones y con distintas fuentes, ¿no es cierto?, de energía y minerales, en fin, la posibilidad de la movilidad eléctrica, todo ello advierte en un clima de tal vez muchos cambios muy veloces y mucha incertidumbre también. Entonces es un buen momento para la reflexión y felicito la iniciativa a Nicolás. Nosotros desde la CEPAL con un gusto y una atención particularmente importante para estos debates. Creo que los temas que están planteados en el seminario, todos ellos, tanto en la dimensión de la cadena de aprovisionamiento como en los temas tecnológicos, en fin, son temas que concitan el interés de la región. Así que simplemente decirles que darles la bienvenida a todos y que de parte de la CEPAL estaremos siempre a la orden para colaborar y para asistir en lo que esté en nuestras manos. Muchas gracias, Nicolás.
Muchísimas gracias, Janet. Thank you very much for your words and for the support also for this webinar series. Now I would like to hand it over to Dr. Sören Deng. He is the head of the Division of Energy, Hydrogen, Infrastructure and Raw Materials at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. Please, the floor is yours, Dr. Deng.
Yeah, thank you, Nicolas. I hope you can hear me all. It's fine?
Perfect. Yep.
That's great. Thank you very much. I will speak in English. Unfortunately, my Spanish is not good enough to, I can understand, but not speak. So please, who is not able to understand English, take the translation. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you at the beginning of this webinar series. It's really a privilege for me, but also a new experience to inaugurate such a webinar series on behalf of the BMZ and along with the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, CEPAL, our long-term partners in advancing responsible mining practices in the Andean region. And let me also take the opportunity to thank you all for your work, your ideas, and your cooperation in this work. As a country that is highly integrated in the world economy, Germany's industry is also highly reliant on imports. Germany is aware of its responsibility to help ensure that standards in responsible mineral production and sourcing are met. This not only applies to companies operating in Germany, but also to those supplying goods and services from abroad. As the automotive industry is embracing the electrification of its car fleets, lithium and copper demand is expected to soar. Wind and solar systems, which will be replacing coal-fired and other fossil power plants, also require large quantities of iron ore, aluminium, and copper. In short, technologies needed for a low-carbon economy are mineral-intensive. And we, together with our European partners, are committed to a low-carbon economy to achieve the objectives set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. The EU's Green Deal foresees Europe to be the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. The post-corona recovery fund underscores this commitment by channeling almost 750 billion euro to make Europe's economy greener, more digital and resilient. But we will not be able to achieve these goals without the import of minerals. Many of these minerals come from Latin America. For example, about 40% of the copper mined worldwide originates from Chile and Peru. More than half of the known lithium resources are located in the lithium triangle, composed of Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. The Andean countries are therefore very important partners for Germany and Europe to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030. To ensure that climate-sensitive policies in Germany do not cause social harm or environmental degradation where the minerals are produced, we are working at home and abroad to advance responsible mineral supply chains. At home, Germany has been implementing its green public procurement practices with about 300 billion euro worth of acquisitions per year. This creates an incentive for suppliers and the construction sector to place more importance on the ecological footprint. With our European partners, this public purchasing power increases to 1.8 trillion euro annually. The private sector is increasingly monitoring their supply chains, and German federal government is currently preparing a supply chain law which we hope could be passed by Parliament within the next 12 months. This would make private sector companies with more than 500 employees responsible for their suppliers meeting minimum human rights and ecological standards. Abroad, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development is actively working with its partners to promote responsible mining practices. For example, we have been a long-time advocate of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, where there will be a board meeting next week, to promote the efficient use of taxes and royalties coming from the sector. Furthermore, we are supporting the Climate Smart Mining Initiative of the World Bank that seeks to establish mining practices that minimize the environmental footprint. In Latin America, we have partnered up with CEPAL to implement the regional cooperation for the sustainable management of mineral resources in the Andean region. In the Andean region program, sorry, or MINSES in short, that's the word I normally use only. The program supports governments in the region in implementing policies that promote responsible mining practices. These include, for example, policies to increase energy and water efficiency and improved mine closure plans too. As part of the project, we have also been supporting national human rights institutions to put in place readily available and effective complaint mechanisms for mining impacted communities. Apart from continuing our support in the above-mentioned areas, we will be increasingly seeking ways to connect our sustainability efforts at home and abroad to cover the whole mineral supply chain. We realize that there are many challenges that still need to be addressed. This includes the difficulty of tracking minerals due to the multitude of intermediaries and the smelting of ores from different sources. However, there are encouraging technology advances such as blockchain and a number of certification schemes being piloted to try and tackle these challenges. Through the MINSES project, we also seek to better understand how regulations at home and international certification schemes can help address the development challenges in mining regions. After all, the goal is to avoid harm and improve living standards in mining communities. To achieve this, we will explore how information and data collected can be used to monitor ecological and social indicators at the local level. We seek to help local governments leverage this increased data availability to improve policy making. This could benefit both mining impacted stakeholders in the Andean region as well as consumers in Germany. With that, I would like to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to open this webinar series. I wish everyone a fruitful discussion today and over the coming 4 webinars, which I hope will show us how we can continue to collaborate on fostering responsible mining practices in the region and for the benefit of all the people and also the economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Deng, for that perspective and the work you're advancing in responsible mineral supply chains. I would also like to thank you for the continued support to the program here in the region over the last years. We now move on to our moderated discussion. This will be a Davos-style interaction without formal presentations and quick interventions by each panelist building on each other. We have prepared questions in advance, and after about 2 to 3 rounds, we will include the questions posed by you, the audience. So please feel free to submit your question anytime during the webinar using the chat function. Direct the question to Cristina Munoz. Please add the name of the panelists or panelists that you would like to direct the question to, and she will organize them and feed them into the discussion that we will be having. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible, so please keep them coming. With that, let me introduce you to the 4 panelists that are joining us today. You have the impressive biographies of each panelist on the website, so I will keep it short. Ben Jones is a managing consultant at CRU, a consultancy with deep expertise in the mining and metals market, as well as mineral supply chains. Next up is Jan Kosmol, a research and policy officer at the German Environmental Agency, focusing on sustainability issues in global mineral supply chains. We also have Hugo Brody joining us, Vice President of Sustainability at the London Metal Exchange, which is the center for the trading of industrial metals. And last but certainly not least, Jaime Gorenstein, who is Director of Active Ownership at EOS Federated Hermes, responsible for corporate engagements in Latin America. Thank you very much for joining us today from Europe and providing your perspective. Ben, starting with you. Crew, as I mentioned, is a leading company providing commodity market insights to clients worldwide. What trends have you observed on the buyer side, so on the demand side, and how has the coronavirus impacted those trends?
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the introduction. Can you hear me okay? Great. Okay. So as sort of Janet intimated in her introductory remarks, it's been quite a year. We've not seen the likes of the events of 2020 before, and it's taken quite a toll on the markets. So we've seen the first year-on-year demand contractions for over a decade. If you're thinking about China, for example, as a key kind of international consuming market, we've seen demand reductions for finished steel at the bottom of the first trough in late spring, let's say, of around 2 or 3%. You know, reductions in demand year on year rising to 5 or 6% for aluminium or refined copper. So that's quite a hit. And producers and value chain entities here in Latin America will certainly have felt those effects. Since then, the situation has stabilized so far, and we expect demand to be flat for those minerals year on year in the months ahead. So the recovery is in part reflected the stimulus, both its size and its structure. So, I mean, it's huge, 6% give or take of GDP in China. I mean, that's bigger than we saw in 2009. It's also been more metal intensive. So there's been more expended on shovel-ready infrastructure projects relative to, say, less metal intensive tax cuts, the likes of which we've seen in previous years, and also a greater reliance on quite traditional infrastructure projects, so bridges, ports, and the like, which are, you know, very intensive in early stage metals such as steel, and rather less than we perhaps would have envisaged in some of the new tech infrastructure, be it telecommunications, data warehousing, and 3G, 5G, and the like. So all in all, it's added up to a big number. And it's been sufficient to stabilize the markets, broadly speaking. We shouldn't also discount the complementary role of monetary easing, which has also, I think, fueled a recovery in the Chinese real estate market. So those are kind of a few brief observations on what we've seen in 2020. I think thinking more about the medium and longer term, I'd probably point to two kind of underlying trends, both of which have been alluded to a certain extent in the introductory remarks. So the first is really the sharpening focus on the environmental, social, and governance standards pertaining to primary raw materials and refined products. And the second is really the rising concern around trade risks associated with highly internationalized supply chains, particularly in the context of deteriorating Sino-US relationships. So maybe just say a quick word to substantiate both those comments. So, you know, on the first point, we've all seen the announcements by major European and other Western manufacturers signaling the intention to reform kind of procurement rules in order that, you know, raw materials satisfy these higher ethical and environmental standards. I think a couple of points really. So one is this trend is broadening both across markets and across commodities. So, you know, in terms of markets, you know, Europe has been in the advance guard, but, you know, we're seeing this spread to Chinese intermediaries. So earlier in the year, for example, we had an announcement by Huayu Cobalt, which is the biggest Chinese producer, where they've decided under pressure from their downstream to stop buying artisanal product, right? So cobalt's been in the advance guard, but, you know, we can see this spreading to other commodities and commodities that are going to be of real interest and importance to the LAC region. You know, aluminium, it's the major players are establishing corporate strategies around a carbon-based product differentiation, right? High carbon v low carbon. Those corporate strategies and the associated branding, that's already rolling out, and we're starting to see, the early signs of similar trends in copper and steel, which are really going to be the markets of most consequence to many in the audience, I suspect. So on localism, a couple of brief remarks, and then I'll pass over. So, I mean, the obvious point is reshoring is already impacting trade and supply chain policies. We've seen a wave of interventions in auto, steel, aluminium, the likes of which most of us, I imagine, are pretty familiar. We're also seeing increased interventionism in primary materials markets, particularly for those that are used in defense and green technologies. So these so-called sort of critical raw materials. I guess from a personal standpoint, it's a bit sad. I think effective trade cooperation has really brought down prices and helped sustain, welfare advancements among producers and consumers, albeit perhaps to differing degrees. And we haven't, with a few moderate exceptions, seen supply outages or trade embargoes in our living history. But at the same time, it's a trend, and it's something we need to prepare for. And when we provide advice to our clients, our guidance is that the adaptive mechanisms that many of the corporates and industrials need to put in place need to recognise the obstacles to reshoring, and these are often substantial. So in economic and technical terms, smelting capacity is old, unprofitable, and expensive to replace in the West, right? So that's the start point. The bill on this is huge. It's hundreds of billions, right? You can't play tricks with basic geology. And the complexity of the modern supply chains also mean that interventions, in my view, are often relatively unsuccessful in mitigating risk in the supply chain. They simply displace it. And we can say a little bit more about that down the track if there's interest. So I guess the bottom line is that there'll be frictions affecting the physical reshoring of capital, and those frictions and the realities of that reshoring will fuel rising patterns of vertical integration, the quest for long-term contract security, and competition for equity stakes, particularly in high-value assets. So I mean, that's a quick walking tour through two themes. I'll stand down now, but I'm happy to take questions.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll come back to some of the points you raised then.
Okay.
Jan, over to you. As the environmental agency, you provide scientific advice to the German government, including on the topic of supply chain management. Can you elaborate a little bit on the trends that you are seeing regarding the supply chain requirements that are currently being considered and implemented both in Germany and in Europe? I mean, Dr. Deng already touched on them, but maybe you can build on that.
I think I can. Thanks, Nick. First of all, in order to classify these trends, I'd like to explain again this footprint perspective, which has been mentioned also by Mr. Deng. And I think it's a perspective which has come increasingly important in environmental and sustainability policy. Taking a footprint perspective means not only looking at the impacts occurring within the territory of the state, but also looking at the impacts associated with imports. And this is especially relevant, Mr. Deng said it, for industrial countries with large manufacturing sectors and heavily embedded into global trade, such as Germany. And our research shows that much of the environmental impact of production and consumption in Germany is actually occurring outside Germany. So, however, assessing this footprint is just the first step. The next step, and maybe the far more challenging step, is to address these impacts with effective policy measures. And yeah, there has been some dynamic development lately with regard to minerals. Some of you might know there has been this whole debate started with the so-called conflict minerals at least more than 10 years ago. Minerals that are mined in conflict regions, and related revenues contribute to armed conflicts. And in focus are 4 minerals, 3 Tg, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. And initially, this debate focused on Central Africa regionally. And following a US law in 2010, now the European Union has passed a regulation, a conflict minerals regulation in 2017, and this will come into force in 2021. And this obliges importers of these minerals to perform human rights due diligence according to the guidance of the OECD, the Responsible Minerals Guidance from conflict regions. And what does it mean, due diligence? It means establishing a management system, assessing and identifying risks in the supply chain, reacting to these risks, carry out an audit and report on all this whole process. But note, regulation, conflict minerals regulation is sector specific, it's material specific, it's actor specific, and issue specific. And beyond this very specific regulation, there's a broader debate on supply chain due diligence in Germany, Mr. Deng said it, as well as in Europe, covering a broader range of ESG issues, sectors, products, and materials. Mr. Deng said it, we have a very intense ongoing debate on supply chain law in Germany, but also at European level, the Commission has announced a legislative proposal for supply chain due diligence for next year, 2021. It's in the EU biodiversity strategy, and this is part of the larger, also already mentioned European Green Deal. And maybe it's important to note that the European Green Deal is not an environmental policy. It's one of 6 top priorities of the European Commission from 2019 to 2024. And in this deal, there are a range of other policies to be expected, sectoral and product-related regulatory initiatives to come. And very highly up to date is the new regulatory framework for batteries, which is also supposed to include responsible sourcing criteria for battery raw materials. And it's announced for October 2020, which is now. Maybe I can go into this later. In detail, I'll leave it here from now. Thank you.
Excellent, Jan. Maybe one follow-up question on the green procurement guidelines that were also mentioned by Dr. Deng. How do you see that developing? I mean, they exist. There are, I mean, there should be given preference to, let's say, low carbon projects. What does this mean if you think about the minerals, about the importing side, about the side that we're talking about today?
Well, public procurement or green public procurement, sustainable public procurement is potentially a big lever. And the European procurement directives have been revised in 2014 and have clarified and expanded the opportunities for sustainable procurement. But they are opportunities. It's a can and not a must. And subsequently, at least speaking of Germany, the impact has been rather limited so far. Very few public tenders include sustainability requirements. And last week, our agency, we held an international green public procurement conference last week, and there were participants from all over the world, Canada, Japan, and they consented that sustainability aspects should be included on a mandatory basis in order to make greater progress in environmental protection. And one result from the conference is also that the industry is quite willing to participate if the requirements are clear. But with regard to minerals, there's a specific challenge because the public sector normally doesn't buy minerals, however, buys mineral-intensive products, buildings, cars. But global supply chains for such high-end products such as cars are very complex, and even the manufacturers themselves have difficulties in tracing every chain back to the mine, although there has been great progress lately. But now you can imagine a buyer in the public sector is completely overwhelmed by this task to define responsible sourcing criteria. So maybe product eco-labels could help, but we have state product eco-labels, but they haven't yet included many criteria for minerals and raw materials, and that's, I think, where the development should go, and is already ongoing.
Excellent, thanks, Jan. Hugo, over to you now. The London Metal Exchange will only be allowing trading of responsible sourced metals by 2022. Could you explain a little bit what this means, especially for the miners and for the region here, and why the LME has taken this step?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and maybe to build on what Jan said a little bit as well. But first, I think it's always worth giving 30 seconds on what the LME actually is, for those who may be a little bit unclear, although judging from the title discussion, I'm assuming most will have a pretty good idea. In a nutshell, we're a forwards exchange with the world's largest market in options and futures contracts for base metals. So the services we actually perform are three primary ones. So pricing, the price generated by those on our trading floor is used in procurement contracts globally, and the Andean produced metals are crucial metals that make up this price. The second is hedging. Users can protect against volatile markets and adverse price conditions, and we've seen some particularly volatile markets this year. And finally, and the reason we're a little bit unique and why our price is seen as so useful to people around the world, and why I'm here talking about responsible sourcing, is the physical delivery component. When a futures contract comes to expiry on our market, it's possible to take delivery from one of our licensed warehouses around the world. Often as a last resort, the metal that meets LME requirements, which up until now has only been metallurgical and chemical composition, but now ethical, coming soon, can be delivered also onto the exchange. So what are we doing in terms of responsible sourcing? Well, after much market engagement in the last few years, and using the OECD guidance that Jan mentioned as our foundation, we're introducing responsible sourcing requirements, again, as Jan kind of alluded to, focused on just human rights, for instance, mitigating against child labor and the funding of conflict minerals. So for all of our LME, 450 plus LME brands, this will be a new requirement across all physically delivered LME metals, not just the 3 Ts, but we're using it for any metal that can be physically delivered on the exchange. And we're doing this really for 3 key reasons. The primary reason is an ethical one. We believe that our industry has an ethical imperative to embrace responsible sourcing principles, and therefore the LME has a key role in facilitating this. The LME obviously is a seller's market, which means that a buyer of metal through the exchange may be delivered metal of any LME listed brand. And we can't accept a situation where consumers are required to take delivery of metal which has not been, for want of a better term, sourced responsibly. Secondly, of course, we have a commercial reason too. The fundamental service of the LME is to price metals. And by the nature of our market, the LME price, the price that people see on their Bloomberg screens, say LME copper, will generally be the price of the least valuable brand in our brands list. And we have to act to ensure that our price reflects the value of responsibly sourced metal and it's not artificially depressed by metal which hasn't been sourced responsibly. And finally, like it or not, by being the world's largest physically delivered metals exchange, intrinsically we sit at the heart of many metals value chains. And it's clear our stakeholders over the last few years overwhelmingly have demanded responsible sourcing. And we've listened to calls to take a leading role in this, calls which arose because we think the LME can most efficiently promote a centralized process.
Excellent, thanks so much. One point that Ben also raised, and that I know that the LME has also been discussing, is what the role could be, or whether there is a market for low carbon products. So in this particular case, low carbon aluminium. Where is the discussion going at the LME? Is this something that you're looking into as marketing it separately? And if so, do you think there is space for a premium price for let's say premium responsibly sourced minerals?
Yeah, so obviously in 2017, when we began our responsible sourcing journey, for want of a better term, we mainly focused on human rights as a direct response to the growing concern from us and many of our stakeholders that our listed brands should be sourced meeting internationally accepted standards for human rights. But since then, in our view, the responsibility debate, which in 2017 for us anyway, focused on conflict minerals, has moved on to incorporate a much broader spectrum of sustainability issues. And we're conscious that in respect of environmental considerations in particular, there's a clear call that companies and markets, ourselves included, need to do better and need to do more. So in recognition of this, we've recently released a discussion paper outlining our future plans on sustainability, including environmental considerations. But to summarize, you're absolutely right. There's trouble with it in that having a set definition for what constitutes environmentally sustainable metal production that everyone agrees on globally is a very tough thing to do. So for example, low carbon production of aluminium that you mentioned, Nick, may mean different things to different people. So very briefly, the way we're taking our plans forward, at least initially, is not by adding a low carbon requirement to our primary aluminium contract, but instead by promoting voluntary transparency of environmental metrics by building trading infrastructure that allows producers of low carbon metal or other sustainability criteria to be transparent and get in contact with consumers who desire low carbon metal. So we're building platforms that electronify sustainability certifications and allow them to be attached to LME warrants and viewed in an online portal called LME Passport. And we're building a spot trading platform that will allow for those wishing to source environmentally sustainable metal to, say, a particular low carbon definition, for example, to be able to connect with those who produce it. So that's what we're doing.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Jaime, now over to you. Hermes has been a pioneer in engaging with companies to improve environmental, social, and governance standards. I remember speaking to one of your colleagues 5 or 6 years ago, and it was really, at that time, it was pioneering, whereas it seems today that these ESG factors and ESG requirements by investors are also gaining momentum, let me say. Can you tell us about your engagements that are relevant for the mineral supply chains and how you see this tendency of investors caring about ESG practices, how that has accelerated in the last few years?
Sure. Oh, thank you, Nicholas. Well, as you mentioned, we as an asset manager, we have had for many years now integrated environmental, social, and governance issues into the investment process. So today I would say that we are kind of fully integrated. It's not, and the industry is moving this direction. That's a big trend in the investment industry, is the integration of all these, we can say, non-financial aspects. It's a bit misleading, but it's not, as opposed to the traditional analysis only of financial metrics. Now we are taking much kind of other metrics into account when making investment decisions on when to invest in a new company or increase exposure or decrease exposure. So we look at much more than just the accounts, just the balance sheet or the profit and loss accounts, much more than that. And the whole industry is moving this direction. And why is that, you may ask? Is it because we are nice people, we want to protect the environment? Yes, of course we are nice people, but it's just because it's more than that. It's because ESG, it's a business imperative. It's not just about being nice, but it's without a solid foundation of environmental practices, social practice, corporate governance, without this all being very solid and within best practice, you cannot generate sustainable long-term value. You may generate kind of a value in the short term, but over the long term, and that's increasingly more and more evidence about it, over the long term, companies that have a solid performance on environmental, social, and corporate governance, they are the ones that will generate value over the long term in a sustainable way. And specifically in terms of the mining sector, so I lead our engagement with companies in this sector in Latin America, meaning that as an investor, we not just buy shares and wait. No, we every time we buy shares in the company, we seek to establish a dialogue with the company. And a dialogue means not just collecting information about the company's performance, but also seeking to influence change when you see that things can improve in the company from the ESG perspective. And in the mining sector, there are a number of material issues that we often see across the board. Safety, it's one. I'll say safety, climate change is a key priority, pollution, and last but not least, community relations and social license to operate. I'll say these four key areas, they're really material issues that and I'll say with every mining company, we raise these issues and we want to see how the companies are performing, and we press for change when we see that they are not performing according to best practice. And of course, the foundation of everything is the corporate governance, kind of a strong board, a strong, diverse board, the competent management. That's the foundation of that. And some may argue it's just something that will pass. I mean, it's tomorrow people forget about it. I don't think so. It's not, because as I said, there's increasingly more evidence that this good ESG performance is key to long-term value creation.
Thanks a lot, Jaime. Two quick follow-up questions on that. First, what are your tools? Let's say you engage with a company, they say, okay, yeah, we'll do that, but they don't. Like, what are your tools in order to move a company that you try and engage with into a certain direction that you think makes sense? And the second one is, how do you see this this move in the investment world that goes more following index funds, passive investors rather than active investors? What does this mean for them? Is the trend there also going in that direction, or is this still, if you like, a niche area for active investors?
Right. So in terms of tools, I mean, the preferred tool, it's a dialogue with the company, with decision makers within the company, where we express our concerns, we express our views, we make suggestions in a constructive way. The company takes that on board and adopt a positive change. That's, I would say, it's an example of a classic successful investor engagement. But not always, that doesn't always work. Sometimes the company are not willing to listen, or they listen but don't take action. That happens. Then we have other tools we can do. I mean, one of them, it's as a shareholder, and that applies to all financial instruments. It's not just about shares, but also about bonds, about loans. So as a shareholder, I have the vote. I can express my dissatisfaction by against the election of directors, against the chairman, or I can present a holder resolution as the
Is this me or is this Jaime's computer? Jaime, I think you're cutting off.
Wow.
Yeah, you seem to have there seems to be a problem with the bandwidth. No, I think you have online connection issues. I don't know. Can the others hear me? Is it my computer or is it Jaime? Seems to be Jaime.
I can hear you, Nick. Yeah.
Okay. So Jaime, I'll come back to you in a bit to finish what you were in, because you've been interrupted. Can you hear me now?
Disconnect and reconnect, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I'll come back to you, Jaime. just trying to move on to make sure that you know your interruption doesn't interrupt the whole. Oh, now you're back. Now I see you. No. Okay. Well, I think I mean. Now I would like to enter into the second phase, if you like, where one question that was burning on my mind and that I wanted to ask each of you is, you know, from your intervention, it seems that there is an acceleration in transparency and ESG requirements by many different actors in Europe. Some may argue that what happens in Asia and North America is more important due to the mineral demand and investment flows that come out of there, particularly for regions such as the Andean region. What are your observations in terms of what's going on there in comparison what is going on in Europe, and where do you see the trends going in those countries? And then I would also like to use, or in your intervention, if you have any particular questions to your fellow panelists, then please shoot away on that end too. So maybe starting this time, going the other way around, starting with you, Hugo, given that Jaime still seems to be offline.
Yes, no problem. So, yep. Okay, I'll just go. So the question, yes. So in terms of the Andean region, what have we seen? If we look at from an LME responsible sourcing viewpoint, well, really part of my role the last 2 years has been reaching out to producers around the world and talking to them about responsible sourcing and making sure they're getting ready for our responsible sourcing requirements if they're LME producers of LME listed brands. And when I've been speaking to the companies based in the Andean region, it's clear that already a lot of investment has taken place in terms of getting their company's management systems and due diligence profiles up to speed, and it's clear actually that there's a lot of good work that's already been done, and not just that, it's also clear that it's not just a core focus of human rights that a lot of our producers in the area are focused on. There's also indigenous people's rights, there's water usage, and there's low carbon production, not part of our responsible sourcing requirement scope. These companies are already doing very well in. So I guess in summary, it's clear that in this part of the world, some of them, we've definitely got some industry leaders. It's not just Europe that's doing well in sustainability.
Right. Thanks, Hugo. Jaime, can you hear me now? Your image is back. Yeah. Do you want to finish your comment from before, and then if you could speak a little bit about you know, the investors' trends, let's say, not in Europe but also in China and North America, where you see the direction that they're heading, whether Europe is ahead in this thinking or behind, or where you position it, Europe on the global perspective, and what you see will happen in other jurisdictions. Oh no. Nope. It seems like, okay, then I'll pass it over to you, Jan.
Well, my close-up perspective is German Europe, but maybe I can say a few words of my perception, what is going on in terms of responsible mineral sourcing elsewhere, especially in the US. I mean, Ben mentioned the sector-specific private industry initiatives in the aluminum, steel, and now our copper sector. I mean, those are global initiatives, and also American-based companies are part of these initiatives. So from this perspective, this is a global development. Yes, looking at China, I mean, China is the big player in when we look at raw material markets in terms of provisioning of raw materials and in terms of consumption. It's the most important player on the global markets, maybe. I just know that the I mentioned the OECD standards or the OECD guidance on conflict mineral sourcing. I know that China is not part of the OECD, but I know that the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, even a long time ago, has adopted those guidelines and made an own Chinese due diligence mineral sourcing guideline. And what I noticed when I looked at it, at the translation, the scope of the risks covered is even broader. It even includes environmental risks. That's what I'm always looking on in terms of type 2 risks. So there is this debate also going on, and I'm also aware, but I'm not into details, that for domestic mining in China, there's something like a green mining strategy, a green mining standard in development and also in the market. So these things are also occurring in China. That's what my perception is, but I'm not into details. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, great. Thanks. Ben?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I'll keep my comments fairly short and fairly high level. So let's just take the sort of the ESG aspects of supply chain from my initial commentary. So I guess firstly on the supply chain side, I think in the domain of carbon, we see some really strong progress in a number of regards. And I think power procurement in Chile, for example, is a standout for me. We've seen a slew of announcements and commitments to green power procurement among many of the majors in particular. And when we've undertaken sort of comparative analytics on carbon and carbon benchmarking, we can see that, you know, Chile is a really standout performer relative to some of its competing jurisdictions. And that speaks well, I think. And it's by no means the only area where we see commitments to cleaning up the productive and process technologies in mining, which is great. I also see quite a growth in awareness around the commercial issues associated with climate policy reform and associated technological innovation. So I've been pushed hard by corporate clients in the region to provide tailored advice on the marketing implications, both pricing and volume. And that's, I think, encouraging. But there's also some realism that I think I would like to offer and a sense of some of the barriers. So one of the barriers is definitely data, right? It's very clear that there's a lack of consistent and accurate measurement of some of these issues. And that is holding decision-making back. And I'd certainly be interested to hear views on this particular point from around the virtual room. I think the second is the ability to articulate and manage trade-offs between some of these components of what is a broad suite of issues, right? So if I were to take, I don't know, iron ore, for example, there's been some very serious safety issues, and that has resulted in a lot of deaths and real corporate kind of depth of thought, shall we say, and reflection. And the consequence of that, at least in part, is a concern around kind of more beneficiation, right? And the side effects of that in terms of having more tailings to manage and the like. So that's kind of, you know, one set of issues driving one side of corporate decision making. But on the other side, we're looking to institute what I think needs to be a global dialogue down the value chain involving the major downstream markets. And those markets are saying very clearly that they need those beneficiated products as part of the early stage of the transformation. So there's a question here as to how to value, how to communicate to investors and shareholders, and how to manage sort of often countervailing issues and risks in this space. And I guess the final point, which really sort of is a corollary on my first, which is you can see the majors are cleaning up further and faster, and that's because they have deeper access, lower cost finance, right? And scale. But even the majors, even the industry taken at the macro level, are still a drop in the ocean compared to the scale of the global construction industries, right? And their needs are quite technically individualized oftentimes. So the buying power, the collective buying power of the industry is weaker than it might ideally be, and its ability to channel and demand innovation in the supply chains is weaker than we would probably like it to be. So there's no easy fix for that, but there's certainly the need, antitrust issues permitting and the like, for the industry as a whole to be able to communicate more clearly the direction of travel for its supply chain requirements. And governments may have a role on that as well. So just some observations. I have a couple of questions, if I may, for the panelists, just to flag, and then I'll sign out. So I was very interested by Hugo's comments on the facilitation of voluntary low carbon aluminium contracts. I'm certainly keen to hear what, if any, data are coming through from those exchanges. And second, to Jaime, which is really when he discussed the breadth of issues that investors are concerned for, I didn't hear water. And I'm just wondering whether that was just an omission or whether it's a secondary concern. So I'll stop now.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ben. And I'm glad you brought the data question up, which is one of my favorite topics. So maybe, Hugo, if you could touch, because the data issue is probably for you when you decide, is also key, how to track it with data. That and the second question that Ben posed, if you could touch on those, please.
Yeah, so the initial question, maybe I should preface this by saying that the discussion paper results we've had by putting out our forward plan I mentioned on low carbon aluminium and voluntary transparency, we are now in the process of having closed the, can you hear me? Having closed the discussion paper feedback session. And so now we're looking at it, and we'll be looking to release a feedback analysis paper in about a month or two. So I don't want to jump the gun too much there. But in terms of how you know that a particular warrant may constitute low carbon aluminium, or how it could potentially be done as we outlined in the paper, an example could be the attaching of the ASI certification and an audit summary report, which also to the warrant, where a consumer could potentially log in, look at the warrant, say, yes, I know the ASI performance criteria is a good certification that I trust. I know that this audit report is attached to this particular warrant. Okay, I now know that this warrant has satisfied low carbon production to what I would like. So that's one way you could search for data via the system and be comfortable with what you are buying if you're a consumer. But again, in terms of general data feedback, you have to wait till the feedback analysis paper released in a few months. I'll be sure to send it around.
Thanks, Hugo. Jaime, are you back with us virtually? Gosh, the internet in I think he's based in London. Seems to have issues. Okay, then passing it over to Jan on the data side, because I know that you're also a data cruncher, and we're nodding vigorously as Ben mentioned that. How do you see that? How do we solve that challenge, if you like?
The challenge to go. We tried to make our contribution to that challenge, and yes, we had some research projects which aimed to assess so-called environmental hazard potentials of minerals. And has also been mentioned the debate on criticality, critical minerals. We always thought the environment part is missing, the environment part of mining. And yes, we had this research project which ended up in a report called the environmental criticality of raw materials, and we did a qualitative assessment, which can be used by downstream manufacturers more to identify priority materials from an environmental hazard point of view and identify like environmental hotspots. But it's just the first screening. It's not a substitute for actual on-site assessments and actual data, strong data. It's qualitative, it's reproducible, it's scientifically sound done, but it's the first screening. And there remains a big data gap, sure. And I just noticed the report of the Responsible Mining Foundation, the Responsible Mining Index on Sustainable Development Goals, and they also had a report on site level ESG disclosure, and the result was very disappointing. That there is, even the majors have on the company level, they have quite a lot of information reporting on ESG issues, but actual data information on site level is largely lacking. And another result was that companies tend to report on success stories in sustainability issues, so where they contribute positively to the Sustainable Development Goals, but tend to be quiet about the difficulties they have or where they might have negative impacts. And I mean, it's clear, it's well known, all the SDGs are interconnected, and there are trade-offs, and there are, to be honest, to be real, and there's maybe a lack of honesty or openness to say we've made these progresses, we are continuously improving, but we still have big difficulties in these issues, and we're working on that. Maybe that's but looking at the actual data, publicly available, transparent data on environmental and social issues, there's still a long way to go. A portal which helps also, which is also building up, is the raw material information system of the European Commission, of the JRC. They are also building up this environment section and feed it with more and more data, which is publicly available. And I think what I see, there's also a lot going on in the area of Earth observation, satellite imaging, and there's a lot of data around from public programs, from Europe, Copernicus program, but also from other programs. And there are interesting projects and also implementation projects. I think also in Chile, there's from Fundación Chile, there's an interesting project which does Earth observation monitoring of tailing dams. So I think the potential of Earth observation technologies and methods is very big to shed light into this area of data.
Nick, am I allowed to jump in, or?
Let me just see if Jaime is back, just to give him a chance, and then I'll pass it over to you, Ben.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry about the glitch.
No problem. I don't actually know how to start now with you. So I mean, maybe the best way is that you were in the middle of a sentence where it cut off. If you could just finish that thought, and then maybe touch on the question that Ben asked, which was how much do you, and on the investor side, focus on water, which obviously here in the region is a major issue.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So just complementing the issue about engagement. So it's it's something that companies in Latin America, they can expect more and more engagement. So more being, I really kind of, but jumping forward to the recommendation, be ready to engage with all stakeholders in general, but with investors in particularly. And our expectations on ESG issues, they are very clear, and we are kind of, I think we are in a position to press for positive change through dialogue, but also through voting, through bond purchase or bond selling. So there are a number of different tools we can work together with other investors. So I think companies have to be ready for that and embrace the opportunity. Don't see investor engagement as a threat, but rather as an opportunity to learn best practice from other markets as we invest globally. About water management, yeah, absolutely. We are kind of that's one of the topics that we often discuss with mining companies, particularly in Latin America. So we seek evidence that how the companies manage manage water scarcity, but in other parts of the region there's water surplus or water variability in general. And also the importance of the link between water and community relations often is a source of tension when there's this kind of dispute for scarce water between the community and the mine. And so that's something to be and we have really watched this very carefully, because we see how bad relations with the community can damage the company, can damage the company's reputation, and of course have a negative impact on human rights. And water management, it's often in many regions, it's particularly in Latin America, it's very closely linked to community relations.
Excellent, thanks so much. Ben, can I, now as we are coming to the last 15 minutes, if you guys could keep the answers short, because after this, I would like to ask a few more questions that are coming from the audience, still give you time for like the closing remark. And so I think we're running tight. Ben, over to you. And then Jan, I saw your hand also raised, so maybe you can jump in right after.
Yeah, I'll keep it really quick, Nick. So yeah, just to Jan's point about kind of the value and the need for asset level kind of insight. That's very much sort of our bread and butter. That's sort of me pulling out the consultancy card here. You know, our clients need to provide, you know, to undertake benchmarking at the asset level and even sub-asset level at the process level. So we've had a good old crack at creating a set of indices, and sometimes it's gone quite well and it's been quite easy. So for instance, we've produced kind of carbon curves for all the major commodities, full chain steel, full chain aluminium, copper, nickel, you name it. And that's where we've taken our kind of cost curves, if you like, which all have techno-engineering foundations, and we've been able to back out the emissions and then refine the algorithms, and we get really, really close quite quickly. So there, I think that's an area where I can say fairly comfortably that we either have it or are on the cusp of it and have a high degree of confidence in the quality. In other areas, and I think that's really insightful for reporting, for driving the operational management, for assessing the financial exposure, you name it. And I'm happy to talk more with people around the fringes about that. But where I think, you know, example where it's harder, you've given some great examples. One that I can speak to with a bit more experience is again on water. Really, really hard. Really, really hard to measure the input. Really, really hard to measure the output. I think we've got some numbers I can start to stand by. But again, I think you need a really good mix of mining engineering, hydrologists, and sort of economics to really cast light to the market on these kind of issues. So anyway, I'll stop now.
Thanks, Ben. Jan?
Very short question to Jaime, relating to the green finance criteria of the European Commission and the latest action plan on critical raw materials. It announced that they will be developed for the mining sector in the next year. In the first round, they weren't in there because it focused much on greenhouse gas emissions, which is for mining, it's not the top priority sector, but they will be developed in 2021. And my question would be, to hear about the relevance in the investment sector. Is the green finance taxonomy, is it a big lever, an important regulation, or not?
No, it is very important, Jan. That's a very good point you raise. It's because we talk about green financing, about green bonds, all these sort of different instruments, but the market lacks kind of a standard of how to measure that, how to assess, and metrics, and that's a big challenge for us, and I think for the whole investment industry and for companies as well. It's in general, there's how to measure, how to account for this, say, non-financial issues that we have been talking about environmental and social issues. That's a huge disparity. And going to Hugo's point about transparency, I mean, transparency is very important, but when it's so difficult to compare the data that comes from different companies, so the taxonomy, of course, is going to be very, very helpful, and it's I think will be an important tool for us in our engagement with companies and for companies to benchmark themselves. So we we have been following that very closely, and I think it'll be an important step for the industry.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jaime. So some of the questions that have been coming in from the public, I've tried to weave them into the discussion. There are some that I haven't managed to do that elegantly. So I'm just going to read 4 more questions out and direct them to each of you. So if you then could proceed in answering them, if possible, in 1 or less minute. So the first one is for you, Jan. You mentioned the EU conflict mineral regulation. What impacts does this have on supply chains? The second question, I will punt to Ben. This is a hard one, I think. The discussion shows that much progress is driven downstream, linked to sales of end products of minerals. What is happening with more transparency upstream on the supply chain? We know that mining, one big spending is upstream. Where do you see things developing there? Then maybe Jaime, this one can be for you. Due to COVID-19, do you expect a lowering in responsible sourcing of ESG standards? And then this one is for Hugo. Do you believe that producers of mineral resources such as copper producers in the Andean region are aware and prepared for the new requirements of the LME responsible sourcing initiatives? So I'll hand it over to you in 1 minute or less to address these complex questions where we probably could spend half an hour speaking about each. Let me start with Jaime.
Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think ESG performance is key to long-term sustainable value creation. That's a trend that has been growing over the years. So it's recent, but it's not that new. But then we talk about the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, and my view is that it's accelerating the transformation. It's something that was picking up momentum, but now momentum is even stronger because of the pandemic. And why is that? I think it's the perception that companies with good ESG performance, they have, particularly the ones that have managed over the years to build a strong and sustainable relationship with stakeholders in general, with suppliers, with employees, with clients, with investors, with the government, with the communities. I think those are the ones that are weathering the crisis and are going to emerge in a better shape. So I think that the COVID-19 crisis is accelerating this transformation.
You're muted. Nick.
Ah, sorry. I was saying, Jan, you're on mute, and I was on mute. Could you take over the next question, please?
On the conflict minerals, what impact will it have? Does it have? Well, the easy answer would be we'll see, because it will enter into force in January. But maybe I can make some, well, not predictions. There are some issues to it. First of all, it only covers 4 minerals. The next one is it only covers the upstream sector, the importers. The entire downstream sector, manufacturing companies, is out. And from our analysis, we know that those indirect raw materials imports comprise quantitatively a big portion of our raw material demand, at least for Germany speaking. But it is definitely an important step towards mandatory supply chain due diligence. But this concept of due diligence is a rather open and broad concept, which is on process duties, and it's an idea of continuous improvement. And at the end, it really depends on the actions the companies take at the end, and their power in global supply chains to act, to take measures. Yes, I'll leave it here, I think.
Thanks, Jan. Over to you, Ben.
Tough question. I'll give it a couple of cuts and then I'll sign off. So I think this is real in the upstream just as it is the downstream. But you can think about it at different levels. So, it's forcing a change in the portfolios of single producers and also of the diversified. So I spent 5-6 months working on diversification strategies in coal, right? And it's very clear that corporate behaviors are changing directly as a result of this shift. It's also changing decisions at the asset level, right? So, the big slices of dollar, I think on the supply chain side, are going into green power procurement. I think we're on the cusp of seeing a whole bunch of money spent on hydro trucks and loco. And that's going to be great to see, because I think it's the beginning of a real focus on cleaning up freight, right? Which matters hugely for bulk industries in Brazil and elsewhere. I guess the final is really on the plant processing. So it's again at the asset level, which is really, we're going to see a big shift in the product mix, which is the point I previously alluded to. We need a lot of money spent on more beneficiated product. There are barriers to the achievement of these goals, but that's I think at a very high level how I see it.
Thanks a lot, Ben. And over to you, Hugo.
Well answered, Ben. That's impressive in the limited time. So mine's much simpler, obviously. Do I think that the LME brands in the region will be ready? I do. I mean, every couple of years we send out a survey to all our producers, and the usual hit rate is 55%. So not great, to give you an idea of the parameters of how many people respond to us. The first reporting date for our responsible sourcing requirements is June 2022. And we've spoken to about 80% of producers globally, the LME producers globally. And when we've spoken to people in the region, many of them already seem to be aligning with the copper mark, which has a high which you can use for LME compliance and has a due diligence standard that's in line with the OECD guidance. And it seems like the number of producers using this standard is quite high in the region, obviously in copper. So yeah, people are well placed in summary.
Great, thanks a lot. I think, we could go on with this discussion, which I think has been very rich, but unfortunately, time is limited. So I wanted to go around once more, each 1 minute, with your final remarks to address 2 points. One, how do you see the Andean region, the mining sector, positioned in the face of all these tendencies that we've been discussing? And two, what would be your one main recommendation that you would give for governments and companies operating here in the region? And I'll start with you, Hugo, going the other way again.
Yeah, so as I touched on in one of my answers before, I think in the region is well positioned in terms of LME, responsible sourcing requirements, and sustainability in general. What would my advice be? Well, it's clear that production, much of the metal in the region would fit into many sustainability categories, and for those producing in the region, they shouldn't be afraid to be transparent and publicize what they do when it comes to sustainability, and be it promoting, for example, indigenous people's rights or water usage. I know the metrics are tough, as we've spoken about earlier, but if you have a way, if you're doing things the right way, then don't be afraid to be transparent about it.
Great, thanks. Ben?
Thanks, Nick. Where do you start? Yeah, I guess a sort of general wallpaper comment is that the development outlook looks pretty mineral intensive, but that shopping basket's likely to change, and it's likely to imply a large scale shift from bulks to base metals, and that has mixed implications for the sort of Latin American region. So think clearly about your endowment and how it matches up against that kind of long-term need. But this kind of market-in's approach to thinking about your prospects for resource mobilization is kind of limited in its kind of application, I would say. And you really need to think about the fiscal policy, the sector governance regulation, and the sort of international cooperative policy related implications, right? And I think it's that international cooperation that we talk a lot about tax, we talk a lot about revenue administration, and there's a lot of complexity in those issues. But I think it's the international cooperation element that I think is most missing in the region. It's an importer of technologies. Access to markets in lithium and these kind of things are going to require new technologies that, for the most part, incumbents don't own or have the know-how in, right? And the other aspect is really the supply chain cooperation in the bulks markets as well, right? You know your customer, right? And you're going to increasingly have to negotiate with your customer on behalf of the value chain rather than against your customer, right, on specific commercial terms. So that's a big shift in mindset.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Jan, over to you.
The region is surely rich in minerals and has the potential to provide large part of the material basis for the urgently needed energy transition to fight the climate crisis. But the climate crisis is not the only environmental crisis we face. Biodiversity is another top issue. We heard about water, and mining has a role, especially in biodiversity and water. To provide these materials in a sustainable way, like I said, the companies should do transparent reporting on environmental protection activities and thus contribution to sustainable development. Not only report on successes, also on problems and unsolved issues. Not go for greenwashing, not for SDG washing. And yeah, maybe most important, to build trust with the stakeholders, reach out to communities, NGOs, and what we discussed today, the global supply chains. And that's what Ben has said, the international cooperation. I think that's key. we need to link the beginnings and the end of global supply chains to establish a dialogue between public, civil, and private actors at the beginning and at the end of local supply chains to come together to understand requirements and find problems that the mining sector meets the expectations of society.
Thanks a lot, Jan. And Jaime?
Well, it's Andean miners, they are well positioned to be part of the solution to climate change and to the energy transition as suppliers of critical minerals. But my advice, my recommendation is for them, in order to do so, to really be part of the solution to the energy transition, that they genuinely incorporate sustainability into their strategies, not just as something nice to have, but developing this understanding that this is critical for the business, and therefore there must be incorporated into strategy, into operations, into risk management, into every part of the corporate culture. So that's critical for the long-term success.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those insights. With that, I would like to wrap it up. Also, thank you again for the audience for taking the time, and I wanted to remind you that this is only the first webinar of a series. For next Thursday, I would like to invite you to the webinar organized by our colleagues at EITI, where Ana Carolina from Ford Foundation, Alejandra Wood from CESCO, and the Ministers of Mines of Colombia and Peru will provide their perspectives on the role of mining in the economic recuperation of the Andean region. And here, obviously, the discussion will also center around how the region can position itself to benefit from some of these trends that we discussed today. 3 weeks from now, we will then go into depth around technologies that are altering the mining sector, also looking a little bit at upstream, what was asked today. And then on the 12th of November, we will discuss the technologies that are being developed to address supply chain transparency. So there some of the questions that came up around data and how to kind of streamline everything with the many initiatives that are currently being developed and tested, how this will all end up ultimately. So with that, I really hope to see you there. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you again to the panelists, to everyone that contributed, also on the back end, to Christina and the others of the team. Thanks so much and goodbye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.